we have an outstanding speaker today. Probably our bravest speaker, because she came down, she drove down knowing a big storm was was headed, and there's a chance that she's going to be trapped here. So certainly our gutsy speaker. Her name is Lelani Craig. She has more than 25 years experience in the language industry. She's started 2 businesses in that area. So one is called CommGap, and this is one that uses, well, she'll talk about this, a transcreation process to translate marketing materials from one language to the next. She also owns Global One Voice, which is a company that offers interpreter and translation services in the medical industry. So those are a couple of cool businesses. She has other professional responsibilities. She serves on the board of directors for the Association of Language Companies. She is one of the organizers of Silicon Slopes localization groups. She's a member of the Utah Women Tech Council, and she recently organized the Utah chapter of Women in Localization. If you want to know, are you going to talk about localization?
I'll describe it, but go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's super interesting. It's a combination of translation and code, which might come up in a minute. She's also received several awards and recognitions. This includes receiving the award from American Express, Count Me In. Goldman Sachs included her as one of their 10,000 small businesses programs. Utah Business Magazine named her to the list of Utah's 30 businesswomen to watch, and she has been named Hispanic Businesswoman of the Year. We are very lucky to have Lelani Craig.
Thank you. I was told I have to use this. Can you hear me? I don't have a very loud voice. And if I try to speak loudly, I will lose my voice. And in about 10 minutes, you guys will have to read sign language. So, my name is Lelani Craig. I'm the president and CEO of CommGap International Language Services. I'm also involved with other companies, and let me just go to that quickly. I own CommGap. We provide translation and interpretation into over 200 languages. Also own Global One Voice. It's a testing and training arm of Craig Enterprises, which is the parent company. And my husband and I also own the Leading Edge Incorporated, where we do airplane leasebacks, and Capra Group. It says real estate, it should really be more like property management, because that's what we do. So we're very diversified. I knew my whole life that I was going to be an entrepreneur. I knew from the time I was little. I remember being 5 years old and picking up my dad's. Did your dads make big bowls of popcorn? My dad used to always make a big bowl of popcorn, and the popcorn would sit in the bowl and get cold. I picked up the bowl and walked next door to the neighbors and tried to sell it to them. And they never bought it. But that's the earliest recollection I have of trying to sell and trying to be involved in owning my own business. In the process of owning my own business and becoming an entrepreneur, I learned several lessons. So in my presentation today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story and how I proceeded and the lessons I learned along the way. How many of you think you might want to start your own business? That's excellent, because this country needs more entrepreneurial, creative minds that think outside the box. I think many times, especially in Utah, we get so caught up in chains and chain restaurants and, it's just copying what other people do. But being creative is the essence of being an entrepreneur. So let me tell you about, yeah, I forgot the slide wasn't there. I should look at my cheat sheet. Let me tell you about CommGap quickly then. We do translation and localization. Who knows the difference between translation and interpretation?
Translation is verbal and interpretation is nonverbal.
Exactly the opposite, but yes. So a translation is written, interpretation is spoken or signed. And like in the media, when they talk about, they had a translator in Iraq, it was an interpreter, it wasn't a translator. A translator deals with documents, an interpreter, everything is spoken. And the difference in personalities and the type of people that do that kind of work is very unique. Typically, a translator doesn't interpret, and an interpreter doesn't translate. That doesn't mean it's a set rule. There are a lot of exceptions. And in my case, I did everything. I was a translator, I was an interpreter, and I worked in the studio doing voiceover and dubbing. CommGap also offers interpretation. We do it in person over the phone and video. We do transcreation, which he talked about. Transcreation takes the concept of translation and marketing, creative writing, and you can translate marketing messages. It's a lot better than simply translating, because sometimes you can't take what's written in a marketing message and convert it into another language and have it make sense. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of those things that don't make sense. And now you know why. Globalization is a step further in taking a product that's been transcreated and take it to the global market. Voiceover, everything done in a studio, dubbing, multimedia, working with videos. We do all those things. And of course, we do testing and training. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about my entrepreneurial path. When I was in high school, I actually spent some time in jail. And that always shocks people until they realize that I worked as an interpreter in the jail. When I was about 14 years old, I actually got my very first job at a Five and Dime. Does anyone know what a Five and Dime is? I lived in Idaho. Five and Dime is a store that sells a little bit of everything. It's the precursor to Walmart, you can say. They sold a little bit of, had a drugstore and a fabric store, and that's where my first job was. Well, I was working there because I spoke Spanish. In case you can't tell, I have an accent. Because I spoke Spanish, the local sheriff's office called one day and said, hey, on the weekends, we pick up people for DUI or people for doing things they shouldn't be doing on the weekend, and they don't speak English. Do you think you and your siblings could come to the jail and help us out? So every weekend, we would go to the jail and help the sheriff speak to the people that were arrested. That was my first introduction into the world of interpretation. So unofficially, my first job was as an interpreter. Then my high school principal took me aside and said, what are you going to do with your life? When you go off to college, what are you going to do? And I thought, study? I didn't know. And he said, you should consider looking into becoming a UN interpreter. Up until that point, I knew what the UN was. I mean, that's something you learn in school. I didn't know they had interpreters. That was something that was completely new to me. And he planted that seed in my brain. Clearly, I'm here today, so I'm not at the UN. But he opened a door for me that I would have never thought about, the idea of language services and becoming a UN interpreter. I eventually moved to Utah to go to college. And when I got here, I was able to quickly find a job working with the state and with different groups, working as an interpreter and as a translator. And I eventually became an in-house translator. So my first professional job was as a translator. And while working as a translator, they trained me on how to do the other jobs correctly. And then I decided to become a freelancer and do that full time. Now, there were a couple of lessons that I learned early on in my life that helped me in becoming a freelancer. And becoming a freelancer is what led me to become an entrepreneur. So for me, it was a path. It wasn't clear cut. It wasn't like I woke up one day and said, I'm going to own a business. And I started a business. I followed a path in learning and evolving and receiving the training that I needed. But my first lesson came when I was 8 years old. So let me tell you the story before I put it up. When I was 8 years old, I decided I wanted to make money. This is after trying to sell popcorn. It didn't work. So I took a little table and I put it at the end of my parents' driveway, and I put up a sign that said, I will cover books school books. When I was a little girl, all your school books had to be covered. That was a requirement of the school. So I thought, I can do that for other kids on the block and make some money. Well, no one came to my table. I sat there for hours. So the little entrepreneurial in me got up and I went door to door and said, hey, do you have any school books that need to be covered? I can do that for you. And I actually came home with a stack of books that neighbors gave me. Now, who gives a stack of school books to an 8-year-old? But I managed to get a stack. I walked home with the books, and I took my money, and I walked around the corner to a store that sold school supplies. I bought paper. I went home, I wrapped the books with that paper, and then I went back door to door, returned the books, and they paid me for that. I was so happy because I had money. I walked back to my room. I threw the coins on the bed. I counted the coins, and I was disheartened. I could not believe that it was exactly the same amount of money that I started out with. At the age of 8, I learned a lesson about making a profit. And it's funny because it's one of those life lessons that I never forgot. I have always remembered, I remember the feeling that day of thinking, I failed. I didn't make any money. So the following year, I did it again, and you better believe I made money. That was a lesson I needed to learn. So when I decided to become an entrepreneur, not an entrepreneur, but a freelancer, and work as an independent contractor, I wasn't sure how that worked. So I looked into the structure of an independent contractor versus a business owner. And do you guys know that it's different? There are differences. An independent contractor has to pay for their own taxes. When you work as an independent contractor, you're given the bulk of the money, and you have to account for all taxes. So I actually went to the tax office, sat down with them and said, explain this to me. And they taught me how to calculate my taxes. And every time a client paid me, I took 30% and put it into a separate bank account. And then every quarter, I did quarterly tax payments, which when April came around, when I did my personal taxes, I was so happy because it took the pressure off of that. Now you may ask, why do I mention these two lessons? Well, when you are going to become a business owner, you have to understand how money works and how it applies to what you're doing. I also had to ask myself some questions to understand. Some of the questions that I dealt with were the what and the why. I was already working as an independent contractor, and I had clients that used my language services, but I was doing one language. At one point, one of my bigger clients was the State Office of Education, which is now called the State Board of Education. The State Office of Education called me one day and said, hey, you do all of our Spanish translations. Is there a way you could help us get the same documents translated into 7 other languages? Well, because of my experience in working with languages, I knew translators that did those languages. And that was the beginning of the wheel turning to me owning a business, a company that grew. So I had to ask myself, what am I going to do and why do I want to do it? How many of you are familiar with Sarah Blakely? Do you know who Sarah Blakely is? I see a hand way back there. Do you know Spanx? Do you know what Spanx are? Spanx are shapewear that women wear. They're super tight elastic. Sarah Blakely followed a similar path. She knew she wanted to have a business, and she would do what I would do, what many women would do, go buy compression pantyhose and cut off the legs and use the top part as shapewear. And she went and created that. Sarah Blakely was one of my heroes. I thought if she can do it, anybody can do it. if you can take a concept and make it a reality. So my what and my why were answered because I knew I had the expertise and the knowledge and the context to make this business happen. So many times we don't pay attention to some of those questions and become entrepreneurs without doing our homework. The next question I asked myself, is there a need for language services? Look at that chart, the size of the global market. It's huge. And there are so many people. Last year, it was $46 billion. 2021, it will be $56 billion. Now you ask yourself, with all the technology out there, why is it growing? Why are language services growing? Language services will never go away. And what's interesting is that they will evolve because technology affects language services, but they will never go away. And that's something that I knew when I started the company. I knew that I would have to evolve with the market, but it would happen. Now look at this next slide and you tell me if you think there is a need for language services. How many of you speak Spanish? Look at this sign, the red sign. Do you know what enchufe is? It's a plug. So what do you think the people, how do you think this sign was made? Google translated it. There will always be a need for language services. And until people realize that there is a big difference between casual translations, such as Google Translate, and professional services, we will always see these signs. What's interesting is some of these signs are from other countries, but some of these are here in the US. Some of the worst translation mistakes I have seen have been on billboards in Salt Lake City. Just terrible. I look at them and cringe because people will spend the time and the money to translate marketing materials because they're trying to reach that group of customers. Well, if they don't take the time to do it correctly, they're not going to reach that group of customers. So it's pretty interesting to look at these things. Okay. So in the US, 1 of 5 people speak a language other than English in the home. What do you think is the most common language? Spanish. That's the easy one. What do you think is number 2? Say it loud so I can hear. Okay. Huh? Mandarin, okay. Portuguese, okay. Let me show you the top 5. So Spanish, Chinese, French, German, and Tagalog. And the next 5, Vietnamese, Italian, Russian, Polish, and Korean. What do you think are the top languages in Utah? I mean, I'll give you Spanish. That's an easy one. Which one do you think is number 2? Okay. Portuguese, okay. I don't have it on a slide, so I'll tell you. Okay, in Utah, Spanish is number 1. Arabic is number 2. Farsi is number 3. Sign language is number 4. Mandarin, number 5. Somali, number 6. Kinyarwanda, number 7. Russian, Burmese, and Swahili. Those are the top languages in Utah. Language services are very much needed. It's everywhere. Did you know that 40% of ESL, or English as a second language speakers, are born and raised in the US? 40%. So it's not just immigrants who came in, it's people who live in the United States. Language services will always be needed in our country. We're a melting pot. And we are leaders in the world. That means we will always be sharing with other countries. One thing I got to do last year, I was invited by the World Trade Center to go with the governor to South Korea and Taiwan. And when we traveled together with them, because we were with the governor, we got to visit with dignitaries. And at that point, we had to use language services. Language services are definitely needed in today's economy. And because of this, these are the languages that we cover at CommGap. And people always look at the list of languages and say, what? Because most people haven't heard of 70% of them. And believe it or not, we use every single one of those languages every year. Some languages are used a lot, like Spanish, and some are not used as often, like Creole, but they are used. We get requests every year for those languages. Okay, let me mention another lesson that I learned. Funding. When I was setting up CommGap, I had to decide how I was going to set it up. Did I want to take out a loan? Did I want to get investors? Or did I want to simply grow it organically? And I chose the latter. We decided to grow it organically, which meant it was going to grow very slowly. But today, 18 years after we started the company, we are completely debt-free, and we are a multi-million-dollar company. So when you start your company, you have to decide, what does this mean for me? Those of you who are considering this, the average company doesn't turn a profit for at least 3 years. In fact, I didn't pay myself for 3 years. I took all that money and put it back into the company to grow it. So I have some neighbors who are such sweet people, but they really know very little about business. And they had the idea to start a business. And they started the business, didn't tell anyone, didn't ask for help. They just dove in. 3 months into the business, they came up to me and they said, can we talk to you? We're really struggling. I said, why? They said, we decided to start a business, and the husband quit his job, and they both dove into this business. And I said, we haven't turned a profit yet. I said, it's only been 3 months. And they said, but we need the money. We need to make a house payment. We need the money. Don't do that. Do your homework and know why, what, and where the funding is going to come from. For us, starting CommGap and letting it grow organically was the best choice for us. Other companies dive right in, take out loans, and get investors and go right into that. I didn't want to do that. I wanted the company to be a clean company that did what it needed to do. So ask yourself what you want to do. I have a good friend who inherited his business from the family. It was a family business, and the business was doing really well. It was a very profitable business. He took the business, worked it for a while. He was involved with a reality show. While he was at the reality show, he was paid a significant amount of money. He took this money and bought a huge building, which all of us were back there going, why is he buying a building? He doesn't need a building. He bought this building, and that building almost financially crushed him. He had to get help. He almost lost the family business that had been in business for about 40 years. Funding is very important. You need to know what you're going to do when it comes to funding. Okay, networking. Let me tell you a little bit about networking. Networking is something that terrifies me. Public speaking terrifies me. But the idea of showing up in a room full of strangers and going around and introducing myself and talking to them is not easy for me. That's difficult. But if you're going to be in business, you have to learn the art of networking. And that was something that I had to learn. One of the ways that worked for me was joining professional associations. I I became a member of the ALC, the Association of Language Companies. That gave me access to the owners of the largest companies in the world. And I was able to meet them and talk to them. Eventually, I became a member of their board. I also started networking with software companies and with technology partners because I knew that was part of my industry and I needed to step outside of my comfort zone. It's very difficult. I don't know if some of you guys might be social butterflies and it comes easy to you. It used to be back in the 80s that all you needed to do was know how to play golf. And you would go on a golf course and play golf and make business deals. That still happens a little bit, but it's not the it thing anymore. Now it's become about being involved with professional associations and going outside of your comfort zone to do things you wouldn't normally do, such as speaking to a group of students, right? So consider networking something that you must learn how to do. Many entrepreneurs don't think about that. The concept of thinking bigger, that was another big lesson I had to learn. When you are so focused on what's in front of you and what you're trying to do, thinking bigger it's not even a thought. How do you think bigger when you're an entrepreneur? How do you think bigger?
Well, you started small, so you had to really grow and scale up, and now you're global.
Right.
So you had to think.
I had to think bigger.
You did it.
Yeah. I think sometimes, let me give you an example that happened in my office. I'm in the process of redoing our app. We have an app that is our business platform that we give to clients so they can do their request services through the app. I'm working with developers, and I assigned a team from my office to work with the developers because they're the ones that use the scheduling system and all of that on a daily basis. The developer came up to me and said, hey, we're doing this and this and this, but your office said no to this, to being able to upload certain things. And I said, why would they say no? And I had to actually sit down and talk to the group assigned to test the app and say, you cannot assume that everything you're testing as far as the app is concerned is for work that will happen with current clients at this very specific time. If we're going to invest time and money in designing an app, we want to think bigger. We want to think of the possibilities of where this app could go and what you could do with it. The concept of think bigger was really something that has come back over and over to me, and understanding that whatever you're thinking about your business would be, structure it in a way that you think bigger, that you think outside of the norm and the common and what everyone else is doing. The people that succeed are the people who thought bigger. They didn't get stuck with what everyone else was telling them they had to do. So, if that makes sense. Okay, this is where thinking bigger led us. Here's a very small list of some of our clients. We work with the state of Utah, we work with the NIH, with the National Institute of Health, with the IRS. We have been doing a lot of work lately with Facebook, working with their technical department. We do all their testing, translation, which is quite technical. Who knew that places like Facebook have a whole testing department? But they do. And Reebok, if you're wearing Reebok or Under Armour, chances are the tag and the labels were all done by CommGap. Those are some of the things that we do. Sensi is another one of our clients. We handle all of their marketing materials, all of their websites. We recently added a number of other makeup companies. And this is where some of the expertise of our teams applies. For example, you mentioned transcreation. Transcreation, we have a team, we call them subject matter specialists. So we have a team that is specialized with marketing, a team for technical, a group of coders that also happen to be translators. And they all work with the different clients on the different applications that we do. Think bigger, think outside of the norm. The traditional translation company will translate documents and manuals and contracts. We chose to go the extra step and include all the services that other companies sometimes don't think about. And this is the last suggestion I'm going to give you, technology. When I started in the translation industry, there was a variety. There were people who used typewriters. Do you guys remember typewriters? There were people who used the old IBM computers, and there were people who worked on Wayne computers. I don't think anyone here knows what a Wayne computer is. Eventually, computers changed and evolved and grew bigger and better. And there was a large group of translators that I used to work with way back when that took a step back and said, whoa, I don't want to switch computer system. I don't want to do things differently. This is the way I've always done it. Well, within 2 or 3 years, they were out of a job. The people who adapt to technology, who evolve with technology, will always have work. The people who don't will be left behind. And that is just the reality of today's world. Be comfortable with technology, understand it. We built our app, and we are in the process of replacing it because it was time to replace it. It no longer did or kept up with everything that the market needed. Did you know that all translations are actually done within what we call a CAT tool? They're not done in Microsoft Word. To do translation, the CAT tool basically has 2 screens, and we upload the English or the source language on one side, and the translator works on the right side of the screen and works into the target language. As the translator is working, the software is creating a translation memory. The translation memory is, in essence, an online glossary that is kept just for that client. The glossary stays with the files assigned to that client. When that client returns and says, hey, I need this translated, and we upload it, we apply the translation memory to the client files, and anything that was previously translated is automatically translated again, and the client doesn't pay for that. So the client saves money by utilizing technology. And we maintain consistency. So we always use the same terminology for the same thing every single time. That also is collaborative. We can have 3 or 4 linguists in the same document working together. So we can do translation, editing, proofreading, and quality assurance all within one shot. That's on the translation side. On the interpretation side, we had to create technology so a client can go online and request an interpreter that we send to their office, or they can opt to just dial into our system and have a telephone interpreter, or if they prefer, they can have a video screen open so the interpreter can see them and they can see the interpreter. We are also, by the end of this year, we will add a feature where we can have conference interpreting as part of that app. Right now, interpreters in a video setting are interpreting consecutive, the speaker and then the interpreter. That's called consecutive interpreting. Simultaneous interpreters interpret at the same time the speaker is speaking. That's UN style. The UN does that. The LDS Church uses that for their conferences. Simultaneous or a conference interpreter right now has to be in person in the room or somewhere close by so they can hear and see. With our new app, they can be anywhere in the world and still do simultaneous interpretation. So we can tap into teleconferences and webinars and provide an interpreter. Sorry, I keep hitting this. And another area that we have just started working into is telemedicine. And telemedicine will give us an opportunity to expand our interpretation services into the virtual world. There are opportunities out there. Okay, so quickly, because we're almost out of time, sorry. Let me tell you about my life. Starting CommGap was something that happened after a series of events happened in my life. No one's life is safe from problems, from obstacles and things that stop you or slow you down along the way. We all face those. And if you haven't yet, get prepared, you will. We all have to go through those things. When I was 12, we moved from Argentina to Idaho. And moving to a very small town in Idaho was a bit of a challenge. There were kids who were really nice, and there were kids who were bullies. And I spent half of my school life being bullied by different kids because of my accent, because of who knows what. From there, when I moved to Utah, I got married, had kids, and in my early 30s, my husband died. And it happened within a matter of days. No one's life is immune from having problems. But if you let those obstacles stop you, you will never achieve anything. And part of being prepared for those obstacles is knowing where you are, what you're doing, and where you want to go. So for those of you who may have faced different challenges in your life, just keep in mind, it's not impossible to go on and become an entrepreneur or achieve your dreams or do the things you want to do. He already mentioned my awards, so I'm not going to mention those. I love this saying by Marie Forleo. If you haven't seen her webinars, look her up. She's entertaining and she gives great business advice. Clarity comes from engagement, not thought. Don't get too caught up in your own brains and just go out and do it. By doing it, you will learn. By doing it, you will understand. And by doing it, that includes do your homework and, all that stuff. So, our slogan at CommGap is, the world is speaking, do you understand? So there is power in knowing, there is power in doing. And I'm grateful that CommGap has been successful and that it pushes me to continue to evolve and improve. And I guess I'm going to stop now to see if you have any questions. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Yes?
Can you tell me a little bit more about localization? Those two things together are pretty cool, I think. So what is it, just the translation of coding?
Localization is the translation of technical things such as software, websites. When we do those translations, we don't pull the text. We actually go on we work within HTML and we provide both the coding and the translation. So those translators are very specialized. Yeah.
If the communication market wasn't growing, what would you change?
I'm sorry?
If the communication market wasn't growing, what would you do differently?
If the communication market wasn't, that's a good question. I think I would take a step back and look to see what is changing. Markets change. They really do. Sometimes we don't perceive the change because they've done this and rerouted. So I would take a step back and see where it went because it has to change. Think of how the world has changed in the last 5 years. there has been so much change in the way we do things and the way even social media changes every 6 months. Something new pops up. So I would do that. I would take a step back and see in which direction it headed.
So it sounds like your business has a lot of different aspects to it. How many of those do you personally know how to do, or is it just more about hiring the right people at this point?
Yeah, I don't do any of the, I'm basically the sales and marketing. When I first started, because I only did Spanish, I did everything myself. And I remember taking a phone call for telephone interpretation on my cell phone, interpreting, but no, I have approximately 2,000 linguists that work with me right now. Yeah, and I have an office in Salt Lake City, and I have remote workers in Utah County, in North Carolina, in Idaho, and in South America, in Argentina, and in the UK. So I have a team everywhere just to cover what's needed.
So with the advancement of artificial intelligence, those sorts of things, how do you see CommGap transitioning into the, assuming technology will be able to play a bigger role in translation and those sorts of things, how do you see yourself evolving with that?
We already use artificial intelligence. That's a part of adapting to technology. It's actually great. Every time there's an evolution and an improvement in the usage of artificial intelligence with language software, it only helps us. Some clients, for example, the FBI. The FBI will use machine translation. Google Translate is considered machine translation. They will utilize machine translation to run all their tapes through that. And then they have, when keywords are picked out of things that are translated, then it's reviewed by a human translator. So we don't touch anything until it's actually picked up certain keywords. And then we have a translator that will sit down and transcribe part of that tape to see if it's significant enough. So it's already used. And I think that as it continues to improve, because it will, I think we will get to the point where software will be able to handle conversation or translation of a sentence without making a lot of mistakes. That will happen. That means we will have to tweak our business and adapt to that change so we can continue to use translators. Now, that means that translators will have to become more and more specialized. There will no longer be room for the people that do just the basic stuff. They will have to be highly specialized. So. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you.
How do you become specialized in one area of translation?
For example, legal translators. Many of them actually took classes in legal courses to understand legal terminology. Medical translators spend a lot of time in health sciences understanding terminology before they can translate. It's becoming specialized in that subject matter. We do have several who are attorneys who stopped working as attorneys and became translators. So,
what does like a normal day for you look like?
A normal day, once I leave the house? Yeah. I spend a lot of time dealing with very specific clients. So I look, when my sales team hands me a client, that means they're either ready to go or it's an existing client that wants to grow. So that's when I step in and I work with them. I spend a lot of time networking with different groups, getting to know them. I attend things at the World Trade Center. Whenever an ambassador comes from another country, I will go meet with them because that gives me an in with that country, and I have someone I can contact should I need something in that country. I educate myself. Last year, I took some weeks off and went to Stanford and took a management course. I never stop learning. I'm kind of a learning junkie. I like to learn, but I think that's important, staying abreast of everything.
Are there any languages that are in higher demand right now than others?
Yeah, we always need more Spanish. That's something that always grows. In Utah, we need more refugee languages. We could always use more Arabic, more Burmese, more, Korean. We need more of those languages. Now, in case you didn't know, the state of Utah actually has, I guess it's a law. It was passed by the legislature. In order to interpret in the state of Utah, you have to have training, a background check, and an occupational license. So they are evolving how language services are used in the state. You can no longer just speak a language and show up, especially if it deals in a school or in any type of public setting, they can get fined. Sign language, there's a huge shortage nationwide of sign language. In fact, when people ask me what language should I learn, I always say, I would think about sign language. Sign language interpreters are protected by federal law, and they are so needed. There's such a shortage. All the different branches of sign language. So.
Is there spaces in your company that are open for those who are maybe a communications major but don't necessarily know a second language to do interpretation or translation?
Yeah, that's my project managers, my office staff. None of them are translators. So I have a large group of people that work with me. We do vendor managers, recruiters. There are all kinds of jobs available. And keep in mind the language industry has become very global. So right now, if you were a project manager, you could probably get a job with a company out of the UK or Ireland or whatnot and work from Utah. You can actually make a career out of that.
Thanks everybody for your questions. I really appreciate Lelani coming. I've known Lelani for a while now. I met Lelani right about the time that I graduated from high school, but I haven't ever had the opportunity before to hear her story of her business, and it's so fun for me to see this side of things, and I'm sure it's not something I've often heard about really even in this field. I don't really know much about this field, so it's interesting for me. And on top of that, yesterday, Lelani asked me, she said, well, Cedar City's supposed to get a big snowstorm tonight. Are you guys still going to have class? And Cedar City is notorious for never canceling class, whether it's the school district or SUU. It just doesn't happen. So I said, well, we probably won't cancel class. And she said, well, if you're having class, I will be there. And so I appreciate her willingness to come and put up with the weather. And just in appreciation for coming, we want to give her the Cedar Award.
Yay.
Made out of a cedar wood. So
thank you.
Sure appreciate your willingness.
It has my name. That's pretty awesome. Thank you.
Let's give her that.